Hello, this lecture is all about emergency preparedness for those living in the Seattle area. My name is Michelle Quinn. I am the Emergency Preparedness Specialist for the Elliott Bay Ward of the Seattle North Stake of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This lecture was originally given June 2019 and has been updated and recorded in October 2020. This is a fairly long lecture, so feel free to watch it in sections or to get comfortable in your seats now. First up, a little disclaimer. Preparedness is not a one and done. Just because you may already have a 72-hour kit doesn't mean you do not need to listen to this lecture. Preparedness is a state of being, and one of the reasons why is this preparedness cycle. If you haven't seen this before, you'll note that there's this ongoing state of planning, organizing equipment, training and exercising and practicing with that equipment, evaluating the outcome of that practice, and then having that feedback go back into the planning cycle. This lecture specifically is for those living in the Seattle area. The City of Seattle does a comprehensive hazards report, and this is nicknamed SHIVA, which stands for Seattle Hazard Identification and Vulnerability Analysis. The most recent version is 7, which was done in April 2019. This looks at some 40 different hazards and is looking at how frequently this hazard might happen versus how devastating is it when it does happen. And so I want to review the top 4 outcomes for this analysis for our area so we know what to be prepared for. In position number 4 is power outages. This is on the more frequent side, even though it's less hazardous. Depending on the time of the year, it can be problematic for if it's really cold or really hot. Also, if we have a prolonged outage, things like cooking and food preparation may become problematic. Not surprisingly, in positions number 3 and 2, have to do with weather for windstorms and snow and ice storms, partly because, again, these create most commonly power outages. Also, those that live in Seattle know that the city is not particularly equipped to deal with large volumes of snow and ice, and that every few years we tend to get large volumes of snow and ice. So the weather is definitely something to be aware of and to prepare for. In the number 1 spot for hazards to be prepared for in the Seattle area is earthquakes. Now, while earthquakes are not very frequent, they are by far the most hazardous natural disaster that we could face. And so really it's this preparation for the natural disaster of an earthquake that this lecture is going to focus on. And a lot of the principles covered will cover you for other disasters as well. All right, this is a picture of the Ring of Fire, and the reason I bring this up is there's several different earthquake threats to our area, and the Ring of Fire is connected to what is called a megathrust earthquake. Now, examples of these our most recent Japan 2011 was a magnitude 9, and that's within a lot of our memories of how devastating that was. Also, you may remember the Chile earthquake of 2010 or the Indian Ocean earthquake that created a really devastating tsunami in 2004, the Miramar area and the other islands in that area. For our area of the Ring of Fire, the last major megathrust earthquake on record was 1964 in Alaska. And then specifically, if we zoom into Washington State, the last one that we know about in terms of records being kept was January 1700. And again, you'll notice this pattern that most of these are around 9 on the Richter scale magnitude. This is a map showing shaking. The dark is high and the white is low from these fault lines. And you may hear this term Cascadia subduction zone. It's just the major plate in the Pacific Ocean that if it moves, we'll have one of these big earthquakes. FEMA basically says that anything west of I-5 is just going to be a write-off. So those specifically on the peninsula and in the Olympics really do need to be aware and have a plan for if there is an earthquake. You'll note that the shaking will definitely hit our area and Seattle, and it may also set off other fault lines, which, if you're not aware, there are several different fault lines in our area aside from this major Ring of Fire fault off of the coast. So other fault lines, there's two other major fault areas of activity in our area or zone. This is the Southern Whidbey Island Fault Zone. There was a bit of an earthquake about a year ago in the, I believe it was in the Maltby area. I might have to double check that. But that was from this smaller fault zone. You'll note that the shaking intensity is very high, just north of us, kind of in the shoreline area. And then we also have the Seattle Fault Zone, which is not just in our backyard, but running under our homes. And so this is a good reason that we're focusing on earthquakes in this lecture. If I zoom in on this map, just to orient you a little bit better for the Seattle Fault Zone, it's an east to west fault, which is really good to know. And it's kind of starting in the south downtown area, like International District and Pioneer Square. Basically, think of the I-90 turnoff, and that's pretty much where we're talking. I've put a little orientation on here. This star is the Seattle North Stake Center church building. And then this is our stake boundaries. And our ward is kind of right here in the center. And so not only do these fault lines cross our stake, but they cross our ward boundaries as well. So again, think of this fault line as basically South Jackson Street and I-90, or the I-90 turnoff. Okay, earthquakes happen without a warning, and this is one of the reasons that you need to be prepared. Other natural disasters, you may have a little bit of a warning, like if a hurricane's approaching, or there's a funnel to a tornado's starting to form, or they're tracking a storm system, or even flooding and they're watching water levels. But with an earthquake, it really comes out of nowhere, and so you'll be stuck with the preparations that you have when it happens. And again, that's another reason why we're talking about this and want to preemptively prepare for earthquake. This is San Francisco. And first and foremost, the starting spot is please check your insurance policy regarding earthquake damage coverage. This is very important for our area and for being able to financially recover after a natural disaster. Most homeowners insurance hopefully has earthquake damage covered. A lot of folks in our area are renting. Please get renter's insurance. This is going to give you greater peace of mind and cover your financial assets. It's easily set up and often obtained from large multi-insurers. For example, I go through Geico. And make sure that earthquake damage is something that is covered. Also, it's not a bad idea to make sure that fire damage is covered as well. That's the second most common disaster after an earthquake. All right, now that we've got that down, let's prepare our homes. So the main thing with earthquake is everything moves. So in the room or place that you're sitting right now, just visually scan 360 around. And if everything started to move, what might fall off your walls or tip over or scatter everywhere and cause a problem or break? We want to start anchoring things down, starting with really heavy things. So for example, this is a picture of the University of Washington Library after the Nisqually earthquake. And you can see the problem of things tipping out and tipping over. Now, luckily, these bookshelves are braced. If you look all the way at the end of the picture, you can see a little horizontal brace so that the bookshelves didn't domino. But objects definitely flew everywhere. Imagine, say, the contents of your kitchen cupboard flying out like this. Or I'm sure most of us have bookshelves of some sort. So start with anchoring heavy furniture. You can get straps that anchor bookshelves and televisions. These often are marketed as child-proof straps, so that like if a toddler climbed up on a bookshelf or climbed up and grabbed a flat screen TV, they wouldn't pull it over on themselves. That works just as well for earthquake proofing. You can also get clasps to close your cupboard doors and keep them from flying open if there was an earthquake or shaking. That's something that I've done for my kitchen because I have a lot of glass in some of those cupboards, and I would not want that to just fly out and shatter everywhere. Glass is the #1 injury that is caused after an earthquake, is lacerations from glass. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Also, if you have big pictures on your wall, especially if they have glass in them, please make sure they're anchored properly. Basically, if you've hung a picture using a hook and like a wire that runs along the back, that should be sufficient for earthquake proofing. Okay, again, most minor injuries are from glass. Before I forget, please make sure your first aid kits have, Band-Aids, gauze, wraps, first aid ointment, things that you could use on minor cuts and maybe even slightly larger cuts. Steri strips are a really good resource for cuts, and making sure that you have the first aid treatment for glass injuries. Also, think about the type of glass in your windows. If you're in a newer building, it may be strengthened or tempered and not so hazardous. If you're in an older building like myself, there's definitely plate glass and it's going to create large shards. And so think about getting out of your home, how much glass you may have to crawl through. It is recommended under your bed to have some shoes so that you can get through that debris and glass okay, especially if you need to leave your building. It's also a good idea if you feel comfortable investing in a hard hat off of Amazon. They run about $15, $20. You don't want an aftershock bringing down debris and giving you a head injury. Also, if you have an old bike helmet, that's a good place to start, even though it's not quite as effective as a hard hat. So this is just an example of what I've got under my bed here. So protect your head, hard hat or old bike helmet. And then inside this box, I've got an old pair of hiking shoes, nice and sturdy and waterproof, some socks, and then protecting your hands and your feet. So again, some type of sturdy gloves. These are the plastic coated gardening gloves. You may have to be removing glass or other debris. If you have difficulty breathing in dust, you may want to put a mask in your under the bed preparedness box. And then at night, it's going to be dark. You may not know this or not, but even if the earthquake doesn't take out power lines, usually the power grid will be turned off for safety reasons, especially regarding natural gas and fire hazards. And then that grid will gradually be tested and turned back on in sections. So it's going to be pretty dark if it's at night. So make sure you have a flashlight with you. And again, this is general principles of emergency preparedness, to have something to protect your hands, feet, head, and a light source under your bed. All right, hopefully many of you are familiar with the stop, drop, cover, and hold on process for surviving earthquake. This is from FEMA. There's a lot of information on this. Basically, if you're in a vehicle, please pull over and stop driving. Do not drive over any bridges until you know that they are safe. Seattle is a city of bridges, so please think through that as part of your emergency preparedness plan, especially if you're thinking about routes to get home from work and other things like that. Interestingly enough, if it's at night and you're in bed and an earthquake happens, the safest place to stay is actually in your bed. And again, that goes to walking around in the dark and with debris and injuring yourself. If you're outdoors, stay outdoors. Do not try to run inside, and get away from buildings if you can, because there's a lot of falling debris that often comes off of buildings during an earthquake. Also, interestingly enough, do not get in a doorway. The idea to ride out an earthquake by standing in a door jamb is actually false. And often those swinging doors on the door jamb can create more injury than the door jamb can help you in surviving a building collapse. And the reason that originally they talked about getting in a doorway had to do with how buildings were built. We have now moved on in engineering, and it's no longer necessary to try to get in a doorway during an earthquake. And then lastly, do not run outside during an earthquake. This is the hardest. It's very counterintuitive. There's a zone right outside of a building that becomes very deadly during an earthquake because of debris that are falling down off the building. And we're going to see this in a second, in a few slides with some bricks. Okay, continuing on for staying inside during an earthquake. The idea is to get under something so falling debris do not hurt you. If you don't have a table present, just get lower than a piece of furniture so that if something falls, it hits the furniture before it hits you. And then obviously hold on because everything's going to be kind of moving and flying around. All right, now we're back to bricks. This is from 2011 Christchurch earthquake, which was 6.3 magnitude. And you can see that bricks become a major issue, and they're actually quite deadly if you're right by a building or running out of a building, and are very problematic during an earthquake. I bring this up because in historic Seattle, guess what we have? We have a lot of bricks. So this is from 2001, which is the last kind of noticeable or major earthquake that we've had in our area for Seattle. It was the Nisqually quake, which was 6.8 magnitude. This picture was taken in Pioneer Square downtown, and again, you can see the same hazard of bricks. So this is why you either stay inside or don't be right next to a building if a major earthquake's happening. All right, moving on. Have a plan. One of the first things after a major disaster is you want to make sure your loved ones are okay. So designate an outside of the area contact that your family will check in with. This is because it's easier to get contact from your cell phone to somebody outside of the area. Often cell phone lines jam up quite quickly, and so it's recommended that you text rather than call. This is because a text can actually be held and then sent once the bandwidth becomes available. Have a paper list of phone numbers in your 72-hour kit, just in case you have to use someone else's phone, because I think it's very rare anybody memorizes phone numbers anymore. Okay, now on to the more of what I would call the classic preparedness discussion regarding 72-hour kits and 2 weeks prepared. So this handout that you're seeing here on Be Prepared and 2 Weeks Ready is put out by the City of Seattle and is talking about gathering emergency supplies both into a grab-and-go kit or a 72-hour kit as well as around your home. And we'll try to provide links to this. You can also Google it as well. But on the 2 weeks prepared, if you've been following along with any of our newsletters, we've been doing monthly announcements so that this is not an undoable or large task, that you can do a little activity here and there and have that accumulate over time into 2 weeks prepared. That is the best approach. It's very difficult to tackle all 2 weeks in one go. It is recommended that you have an emergency radio. For our area in the city of Seattle, Cairo 710 AM is the designated emergency response band. For our area, it's also very wet. Please, 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 please store things in plastic bags within rain gear. If you can get a waterproof backpack, that is ideal. If not, get some type of rain cover for your backpack. And as you pack and check emergency supplies as well as camping gear, please keep in mind being prepared for rain and wetness. Put all your gear into a backpack. If that doesn't work, or if you don't have a great back, use a suitcase or a roller bag. And this is just going to help you be a little more mobile and prepared if you need to exit your building quickly or move to another location. And then finally, I know we're all guilty of this. We need to review our supplies regularly. There are foods and medications that have expiration dates. It's good to have fresh batteries and to double check your equipment and just know that it works and how it works. If you have equipment and you never use it, it can be a difficult learning curve when you're already under the stress of recovering from a natural disaster. All right, 2 weeks prepared, 2 weeks worth of food and water. This is, again, good general preparedness. If you're sheltering in place, if you have to quarantine, or even if you're just short and you're living paycheck to paycheck, it's good to have a little bit of food and water on hand. Start with non-perishable, ready-to-eat food, and some of this can double up as something that you put in your 72-hour kit, such as dehydrated camping meals are ideal because they have a very long shelf life and they're just add water. But you can also do common things like what you might find in your pantry, say macaroni and cheese or ramen noodles, canned chili. Just make it sure it's something that you would actually eat. For general 2 weeks preparedness, not specifically related to earthquakes, it's good to remember that your freezer is a great asset for storing ready-to-eat meals, and to have a meal or two in the freezer can be helpful and can also save you money. Instead of paying to eat out, just microwaving some things can be a lot cheaper. It's good to have common cooking or pantry ingredients. Think of baking, like having flour, sugar, oil, or even common cooking ingredients like oil, garlic, things like that. Spices are another thing, salt and pepper. And then finally, think about fridge-stable fruits and vegetables. So things like apples, root vegetables like carrots, they have a longer fridge shelf life. And again, this is going to kind of keep you healthy to have fruits and vegetables around rather than just eating everything out of a box. And then finally, if you feel like you have this all nailed down, you can move on to larger bulk food storage items, such as your number 10 can size of beans or rice, flour, things like that. All right, I've stuck a new slide in here, 2 weeks prepared COVID, because if you are quarantining, that's going to be 14 days. Just a few things to prepare and think about, because it's good to have this down before you feel really nasty or before you're stressed out because you're taking care of somebody who's sick. Please make sure you have some over-the-counter cold and flu medication. This could be things like Mucinex or Alka-Seltzer Plus. There's all sorts of different brand names, but something that's going to treat the symptoms of cold and flu. Have a thermometer. It's good to know if somebody's running a temperature and also how high and how long that temperature has been. As you call and consult with healthcare professionals, it's helpful to pass on that information. If you are taking care of somebody who's sick or has to go into the home of somebody who is sick for some reason, you're going to want to protect yourself, and this is going to be a minimum, and I repeat, a minimum, of an N95 mask worn correctly and disposable gloves. You may also want to add eye protection to this list. And of course have lots of hand sanitizer everywhere, as hopefully you already do. And then make sure you have up-to-date prescription medications, not only so you don't run out of medication, but say you're somebody who once in a while finds an inhaler beneficial. because COVID does attack the respiratory system, please make sure that you have an up-to-date inhaler if you haven't used one in a long time. And then finally, I can't emphasize this enough, please establish primary care just for your general health and well-being and check-ins. And also think through where's the closest emergency care center to you, or where would you go if you needed urgent care. And then have those contact phone numbers handy, because when you're not feeling well and you're stressed, it's going to be very hard to think clearly and decide, who am I going to call to consult about this illness. Also, please remember that you are going to call and consult a healthcare professional rather than go into clinic, because we don't want to spread COVID germs to everybody else in the waiting room. All right, I'll get off my soapbox about COVID. Okay, have a plan regarding your workplace. This is going back to emergency prep for earthquakes and natural disasters. Just quickly, know what your work plan's emergency response is. Store some basic supplies in the office, especially if it's far away from your home or you think you might be sheltering over in your office. You may be walking long distances to get home. Again, this is the point that Seattle is a bridge-based city. Please have some walking shoes or decent foot gear around. And then, like I said, you may end up sheltering in place at work. Just have an alternative plan if you're not able to get home. Maybe it's a close friend or family member that you'll have an agreement with that you can come to their home if, say, there's a really bad snowstorm or something like that. And then know your nearest Seattle City hub location to your work. We're going to talk about these hub locations in detail in just a moment, but they're basically designated areas to congregate after a natural disaster. So not only are we going to talk about finding the nearest hub for your home, make sure you also do the same for your workplace. And that also goes for schools if you're physically out of school. Okay, so think about, important, after a major earthquake or natural disaster, can I shelter in place or stay in my home or workplace, or do I not feel safe and I need to leave? So think about building integrity, right? Am I working in an old historic Seattle brick building in Pioneer Square, or am I in a new glass high-rise downtown, or do I not even know how old the building is that I'm working in or how safe it is? So I'm just thinking about what type of building you're in, what it's made out of, and how old it is can help answer some of these questions. So for example, I'm in a more historic apartment building, and it's probably not going to be safe if we have a major earthquake. I'm assuming it's going to crumble to some extent. And so in my preparations, I need to prepare for possibly leaving that area and maybe camping out for a little bit until I can get relocated. So think about outside living. These are pictures literally right after the major earthquakes in New Zealand. The top one with all the tents is out of Kaikoura, and you can see that people are literally camping, and so it's good to have and review a set of camping gear. And then the ones on the bottom are from a more urban example, and they're again from the 2011 Christchurch earthquake. So if you had to leave your home, could you stay in your car as an option? Transportation is going to be very severely limited, so you might not be able to just run to a friend's or family's house. Again, this idea of preparing mentally to maybe camp out for a little bit can be helpful as you run through emergency preparedness scenarios. Again, these hub locations are designed to be areas where people can congregate and are outside, and so it may turn into a scenario like these pictures that we see below. All right, if you leave your home, there are these signs put out by the City of Seattle Emergency Preparedness called SNAP, which is the Seattle Neighborhood Actively Prepare group. And one side says help and one side says okay. And you basically put this in your window. So you're already going to have this sign. It's already going to be printed off. And again, we'll try to provide links for these things, but you can also Google it as well. But this is super helpful because after a major earthquake, there's going to be a huge team of people sweeping through block by block of the city and making sure that everybody's kind of out or has been helped and trying to triage the situation. So it can be very helpful as they go door to door to be, I'm okay. And often people will put a note of that they've left and kind of when and where for follow-up. So write who was in the building apartment and where you have gone, and that's going to help for accountability for search and rescue. All right. We're getting towards the end here. We're going to go through this pyramid of levels of preparedness for the city of Seattle. A lot of people don't even know what the city different levels of preparation are, and so we're going to review this information and how you fit into these levels of preparedness. So this is quite important, and we're going to take this pyramid apart in these 4 levels here. So let's start at the top, which is first responders. And so Seattle Office of Emergency Management, this is going to be fire, ambulance, police. If there's a major disaster, all the phone lines are going to be jammed. Please text, do not call. You can text 911. More importantly, sign up for the City of Seattle and King County alerts, which are often text messages, but they do have some other options. I've been on this for a while, and it is very helpful. If there's a major disruption, you'll know about it. So things like, say, protesters are blocking part of downtown, please avoid the area. Or major accident on I-5, all lanes closed, please don't get on the freeway, stuff like that. So that's at alert.seattle.gov. And again, do yourself a favor, sign up for City of Seattle alerts. Okay, next on this pyramid is your community. So dialing it in a little bit, this is where we're going to talk about hubs and these locations that are specific to where you're living or your community. So Seattle emergency hubs are an area that is set up outside that's going to have some trained volunteers that are going to help starting to collect and distribute resources after a major natural disaster. Part of this is communication and part of this is resources. So if you needed help, information, or if you have ham radio skills or need to communicate on the ham radio network, that is all going to happen through these hub locations. And these pictures are from an annual drill of one of the hub locations that was taken last year. And so they had an initial kind of message taking triage area, say you're trying to find somebody or you're trying to get somewhere. And then they have these kind of exchange boards that are a paper-based system that we can put these incoming and outgoing requests. You can also go to the hub if you are able to help people or want to help people. They have an area of resources and can give you assignments. So it's a big kind of coordinating platform. And then finally, they do have general kind of community information about surviving natural disasters. And you can see some of these free flyers here on this picture below. All right, this is just an example of this very rudimentary kind of incoming, outgoing system that will be at these hub locations. So they have needs and resources covering everything from water, food, and shelter to, babies, tools, health assistance, miscellaneous. And then the important part is they've got missing and found persons board as well. Okay, moving on. HazardReady.org Seattle is where you can find your hub by just putting your address in. You don't have to try to figure it out on the map. And you do have to scroll down a bit because it's going to give you a lot of information on this website. But eventually you'll get down to local resources and it says hub nearest to you. And this is happens to be my neighborhood closest hub, which is the Good Shepherd Center, and there's kind of a Pea Patch and Park area. And so that's what you want to find out, and then take a look at that on the map and see how far is that from your home and work, how hard would it be to get there, how big is the area, how many people you might anticipate will be congregating in that area after a disaster. So here's the map of the Seattle hub areas, and you can see that there's a good several dozen around the city. There's a PDF available, which is good for your 72-hour kit, again, if you don't have good internet service or need a paper copy. And then there's a nice interactive map, again, available through Seattle Emergency Preparedness website. I do want to point out a few things about the locations of these hubs. This is important for people that are living downtown, which is directly our congregation. So I've zoomed in. These are all the hub locations, and we're downtown. And to orient you a little bit, here's the stadium and the Space Needle on top of this map. And as you look at these little pins for the hub locations, notice that downtown Seattle, Belltown, and kind of Pioneer Square, that's a really densely populated area, especially more kind of towards Belltown. And there's like one hub for that whole entire area. And that's because there's not a lot of park/outdoor space in this area. And so you're going to want to make sure you have really good walking shoes, because you may be walking to another hub location like the Olympic Sculpture Park if you're in the Belltown area, rather than going to Pike's Place, things like that. So make sure you've got those good shoes. And then if you look at south of International District, this whole entire industrial SoDo area is a high hazard area, and so there are no hubs here, because if we have a major earthquake, this is all going to be kind of devastated and unavailable. So if you live in that area, you may want to seriously consider your emergency preparedness plans. Again, that's kind of south of the stadium. Okay, and this is why. So this is a hazard map, and you can see a whole bunch of orange and all these little dots kind of in this area. And to orient, this is I-90 going east to west, and then this is I-5 going north to south. So it's this lower quadrant here, and this is a liquefaction flooding map. And if we have a lot of shaking, and the shaded red area at the bottom is kind of the fault zone, that whole area south of the stadium is going to be taken out by liquefaction and flooding. So this is when looser soil that's prone to liquefaction will instantly flood. So just think of it as nasty, mucky water everywhere. So Harbor Island, the east part of West Seattle, the whole SoDo district, the direct waterfront, like if you're down the hill, like below First. So all the pier kind of stuff right off across the street from the piers. Inner Bay area, and up farther north, the whole kind of University Village area is very low-lying, almost reclaimed land. You can see this little triangle of flooding up there. So if you live in those areas, please be very aware of the flood risk and the liquefaction risk, and plan accordingly for emergency preparedness. It's going to be pretty grim if you're in those particular areas with flooding. These same areas are at risk for if there is water overflow from any type of tsunami. We're sheltered enough by the sound that we're not going to have like giant waves coming over our city like you might think when you hear the term tsunami. But there can definitely be shifting in the water tables and water tides, and these low-lying liquefaction areas are what are going to be hardest hit first. Okay, so that's the top two. Now let's drill down to your specific house and maybe your neighbors. And this is what's called SNAP, Seattle Neighborhood Actively Prepared. And please get to know your neighbors. There's so many good reasons why you should get to know your neighbors. So I put this in red as a big homework assignment. And, you know, just make some cookies and knock on doors and get to know who's around you. SNAP, Seattle Neighborhoods Actively Prepare. Basically, a SNAP group is a smaller kind of you and your neighbors in your building, or you and your neighbors along your street, getting together and coordinating. And it starts with getting to know who are these people, and then what resources do they have for emergency preparedness. There are some PDF forms that you can actually fill out, and if you want, you can even file your SNAP group with the city. And it's just helpful to know like who may have heavy equipment if we need to start moving trees out of backyards, who might be trained in ham radio communication operations, who may have first responder type training, especially healthcare emergency training. And then even simple things like does anybody have walkie-talkies or rope or camping gear, like maybe we need to all be cooking outside. Does anybody have a grill? Things like that. So think of it as getting to know your neighbors and then kind of doing an emergency preparedness inventory that you as a neighborhood group could coordinate and use together. Okay, more reasons to get to know your neighbors. This is our Seattle North Stake Church building. In an earthquake, this building's probably going to be pretty out of commission because it was built in the 50s and does contain a lot of brick. And so please do not plan to shelter in the church building. We do have a big parking lot that would be helpful for, temporary camping out and things like that. But get to know your neighbors because members of our ward are spread all over the stake. It's not necessarily realistic that your ministering brother or sister is going to be close enough to be able to get to you after a major natural disaster. And it may be physically difficult to check up on those you minister to if they live across town, things like that. Again, texting recommended for checking in with other people. Have extra phone battery or some type of emergency battery. Power source is going to be really important because most of us will probably just be on our phones trying to get emergency updates and connecting with other people. And then, of course, get to know the church members in your neighborhood, especially if you're a mid-single adult. They may be in a different ward boundary. And then, again, don't plan to shelter in the church building. Okay, homework review. We've got you and your family at the bottom of this pyramid. Check and build your 72-hour kit and your 2 weeks prepared plan. You and your immediate neighbors, either in your building or on your street, get to know who they are and talk about if there was a major natural disaster, how could we help each other, and check in. Find your nearest hub for both work, school, and home. These are outside areas designated by the city that are going to have resources and where you can either find help or provide help after a major disaster. And then finally, sign up for City of Seattle alerts so that you do know if there's something major going on in the city, and this will help make your life and your commute a little bit easier and safer. All right, that is the end of my lecture. Thank you so much for sitting through that absolute large amount of information, but I hope it's really given you something to think about as you prepare for both a natural disaster or even smaller incidences that may happen because of weather or the city and location that we live in. And hopefully by being prepared, you'll have more peace of mind and you'll be more ready to serve yourself and others if something does happen to come about in our area. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out and contact me. Again, you can look me up in the directory, and my name is Michelle Quinn. I'm the Emergency Preparedness Coordinator for Elliott Bay Ward in the Seattle North Stake, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Thank you very much.